Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for today's topical webinar, Creating Database Connections with TEKLYNX Software. We normally have a basic and advanced webinars for all of our labeling products each month, but here at TEKLYNX, we recognize there's a lot to learn about the labeling world. So because of that, we have launched this particular series of training webinars that are focused on specific topics that we feel or we get questions about for our current users that they're facing, and of course our potential users in the future. So today's webinar will focus on one of our most requested topics, and that is database connections. Excuse me. Basic and advanced webinars are kind of prerequisites for this webinar. You want to make sure you kind of have a basic understanding of what's going on. And if you've taken those webinar training guides or courses, you're probably on point. Basically, we kind of go over object creation as well as manipulation in the basic webinar, and we kind of go over database connections fairly decently and in depth in the advanced webinar. So we're assuming that you already know these topics. So for today's webinar, I will be using CodeSoft. If you are a label view user, the interface will be fairly similar. It'll look pretty much the same, and most of the functions and features, like how you get to things, are pretty much exactly the same. As for Label Matrix users, many of the same features are available. However, there may be some slight differences. We do recommend using Label Viewer CodeSoft when bringing database connections into your label designs, as they do have better features and functionality. If you're on Label Matrix, don't panic. That's not a bad thing. Luckily, if you guys find that you need to move to a higher tier software, upgrading from Label Matrix to Label View, or Label Matrix to CodeSoft, or even Label View to CodeSoft is fairly easy with our built-in label file converters. So let's go ahead and kick it on off. I'll introduce myself here. And my name is Nicholas Harbour. I am an enterprise support technician. I have been with TEKLYNX for roughly about 3.5 years, going on 4, coming up soon. And before we really get into things, we kind of want to go over some housekeeping items. One thing is, audio has stopped. Let's see here. That's better. Oh, okay. So you can hear me now? All right, perfect. We do have a question and answer section. Thank you, sir. That is the next point that I was actually going to get to. We do have a moderator for this particular webinar. Just to give you a heads up, you may see that in the audio section, you're muted. It's not because we don't want to hear from you. It's just that if we have, 90 people all trying to talk at once, it gets a bit chaotic. So we have a moderator, and if you have a chat or a question rather, that you need answered immediately or you think is pertinent or very important that you have a question about, whatever we're covering, go ahead and send that chat to in the chat section, and our moderator Tony here will be more than happy to answer that for you. We will be doing a Q&A section at the end of this. But first and foremost, beyond this point, we get into the agenda of what we're going to do. I do want to mention first and foremost that what we as a label design software company, we don't manage databases and we don't manage your data. We can help you connect to that data using our software, as well as maybe providing some suggestions on what provider drivers to use, things like that. But I can't stress enough, we don't manage your data or your databases. So let's move on. So as for the agenda today, we will be going over why we would use database connections in the first place, because that's a pretty basic and very logical question. Then we'll be going over types of databases, as well as some suggestions to data management principles. We'll going over the differences between table lookups versus database connections. And then we'll be handling the live training demonstration. And then at the end, we will be doing the question and answer section. So before you guys joined us, we did do a poll of, what our end users are using today. And these are, as for the attendees, this is what you are currently using in terms of databases. So as you can see, mostly people are using Excel, as it is very easily deployable and easily accessible. SQL and Oracle are on the lower end, but those are kind of like the power users, the guys that need the heavy hitting databases. Other is 14%. And then of course we have Access, which is at 14%, which most people use Excel. If you want to do some more things with it, and there are limitations in Excel, generally you move to Access. So let's go over why we want to use database connections now that we've kind of figured out what everyone's using. So the first bit of information, or the bullet point I should say, is that variable data on your labels is much better than static information. It allows you to update information frequently and on the fly, as well as not have to worry about updating every single label. And if you have a database already, this is perfect because all of your data is already there. It already houses everything you need, and all you need to do is connect it to your labels and then pull that information into the proper objects, wherever they may be. And finally, but certainly not least, is that a few templates is much better than 100 individual files or hundreds of them. So if you have commonly, I see people that are food related industries, and they have one label for each individual product. Well, it makes it kind of a pain when you have to go through each one of those labels and update the ingredients and so on and so forth. So having one master template, because the template stays the same. Only thing that's changing is the data. Connect a database to that, you have one label instead of hundreds or thousands, and you can, page through your database to find the record that you're looking for. And what that means is you save on storage space because less storage space is taken up by all the files that you have. There's fewer files to share and back up if you have multiple production workstations or sites that you're connected to. It also allows for centralizing your data storage, so it allows you to essentially pull all the information from a singular server or computer, so that way you know that everyone is getting the same exact data. This is comparative to the alternative, where you have localized files that are on the computers individually, like an Excel spreadsheet or something like that. And you have to, if you update one, you have to basically manually go and update all the others. Where if it's all centralized, makes it a little bit easier. And then that kind of ties into updating that product data with ease. So instead of going to each individual static label and updating a part number or a price or something of the sort, you can merely go into your database, update that column or row of information, save it, and then open up your label again, and voila, the data has been changed and you saved yourself a whole bunch of time. So now that we've gone over why you would even use database connections, let's go over the different types of databases. Now, so far we kind of categorize them as about three different types of databases. We have flat files, which are considered .txt or .csv. Those are comma separated value files. You probably have seen this if you used Excel or have been using older versions of database formats. They are pretty much just like comma delimited files, essentially, very one-dimensional. Then we have our spreadsheets, which are Excel and DBF, which do have some formatting to them, but essentially they're two-dimensional spreadsheets. That's all they really are. They can be used as databases, but you have to remember that they are still just spreadsheets, not true database programs, which brings us to our last category, which is relational databases. This includes SQL, Oracle, Access, basically anything where you're able to tie a primary key, a field, a table, something with a relationship to another object, such as another table, another product number, another database entirely sometimes. That is what we mean by relational databases. And of course, if you have any questions about this, I'm going to reiterate, please feel free to chat in. Our moderator will help answer that for you. But the main difference between these three is that flat files, although maybe not easily deployable, are fairly easy to create and use. Spreadsheets, however, are easily deployable. Excel is used everywhere. DBF, however, I would mention that Microsoft is doing away with this. It is an outdated database format. So if you're on DBF, I would highly look into either Excel or Access, because you can easily import the DBF into either one of those programs, because the Excel and Access, part of the Office 365 program, they are the new DBFs in this sense. So now that we've gone over the types of databases, let's go over the database connections. What types of database connections are there? Well, this one's actually pretty simple. There's only two. First one is we have ODBC. This means Open Database Connectivity. It's an older format of connection type. It's been around for quite a while. The main thing to take away from this, if you remember anything about ODBCs, is this main point right here. It does not save your username and password credentials. So every time you access this database, it's going to prompt you for like a password and a username. Now, this can become an issue if it's a severely locked down environment, or the file is locked down or something like that, and it requires credentials. Sometimes there are ways to get around it, but more often than not, it can cause issues querying information. Now, normally, once you enter in the credentials and then you're in the database and you query the information, you're fine. But if you close that label and open up another label, you're going to have to put in those credentials again to establish a connection with the database. Not very time efficient, if you will. Additionally, one thing or the two things, probably the most important portions of this, besides the does not save username and password, is that as an end user, when you're dealing with ODBC connections, you must understand provider drivers and file extension types. If you don't, you're going to have a really rough time trying to figure out how to make that connection. Additionally, you must understand how to create schemas, or basically file formatting is what it is. The technical name is schema, but essentially it's defining the format of your data. And that's only if the file type requires it. And we'll cover over that a little bit in detail when we get to that point, when we go over CSV files and such, and I'll show an example as to what exactly that means. So the other one now is OLEDB, which is Object Linking and Embedding Database. It is a newer format of connection type, and really importantly, it does save the username and password credentials, so it doesn't require you to enter it in every time you query the database. And the file format, or the definitions of the format, are usually already created, due to the file type. Basically, this means like in Excel, once you type in data, usually what will happen is if you type in all numbers, it'll go, oh, okay, so that's a numbers column. So that's the data format. That column is now numbers. So anything you type in there is going to be treated as just integers. And that's pretty much what the schema is. It allows you to define the format. So OLEDB generally does it for you, whereas ODBC, sometimes it does require you to manually set it up. So now that we've gone over the types of database connections, let's go ahead and take a look at the next topic on our agenda, which is data management principles, and take a look at some data management principles. Now, these are just friendly suggestions from us, and we've seen a lot of issues with a lot of end users over a wide spectrum of things. And these are just the most common, I guess, best practices and potential pitfalls that could be easily avoided just by simple preparation and some backup stuff. So, and speaking of which, that is our first bullet point. Make sure you have proper backups of your database. Cannot stress this enough that if it's important to you, have a backup. And there is an old IT saying that I hold on to quite dear, and I say it quite often, is that if like I said, if something's important, back it up. If there's not a backup of the backup, it's not that important to you. So if you have a backup, make sure you have another one somewhere else, just in case that something happens to it. It's a rare occasion, doesn't really happen often, but weirder things have happened in environments. Second thing, which also kind of alludes to the first point, is make sure now that you don't only have proper backups of your database, but ensure that you have backups of your data, external files, and labels. So that means like text files, images, databases, serial files, anything that's related to your production instance and your labels. You make sure you want to back that up, archive it, have it in multiple places, so that way, no matter what, you're always prepared for the event of something terrible happening, which we don't ever we didn't ever hope has happens, but it is one of those things that does happen every now and again. One thing, data management principle we want to go over is centralized database locations. Much like I talked about earlier in one of the previous, like why even use database connections, is much to that point. Instead of updating 6 workstations with the same file that you have to push out, over the network, or individually go to each particular workstation and do this, if all of your information is on a centralized location, you can basically open up the database, update it, save it, close it, and then anyone on the network that's accessing that same exact file through their labels will be able to see the changes reflected, as long as they don't have the label open at the time. You can close it, reopen it, and you'll see those changes. One thing that I do kind of like suggest to end users too is assigning a relevant name to your data files, as well as the connections within your TEKLYNX software. It basically, my main point is, if I had a database that was a complete entire master inventory list of all of my products, I would name that file master inventory. So when I look at that file, I know exactly what's inside of it. And that could also be said of the connection inside of your TechLink software. Too many times, and unfortunately, sometimes it's not their fault. They're just getting the software new, and they're just creating stuff, and they're not quite sure how to use the software yet. So you kind of see these things. But a lot of times you can see a lot of connections called Con1, Con2, Con3, or names that are not really relevant to what data it's connecting to. So it gets kind of confusing as to where your data is and why you connecting to that. So if I had a file called master inventory and that was my inventory list, then my connection in tech and the TechLink software would be master inventory. That way, when I look at it, I know exactly what it is. And finally, and this is kind of more or less like a self-improvement kind of thing too, because if once you understand how your database functions and its limitations, you can understand how you're able to use and manipulate your data inside of our software. So there's just simple things like with Excel, there are certain cell limitations on characters. Once you get to a certain amount of records, depending on how many, how large the data is in Excel, it could no longer load properly because it takes a really long time to query. Now, I'm not dumping on Excel. I'm just saying that's the first thing that comes to mind when I think about limitations, because more often than not, we're moving people from Excel to Access or suggesting to move to that so that they can connect to their data better and not have as many issues as they are currently having. So now that we have gone over these suggestions of best practices, we're going to go take a look at the differences between table lookups and database connections, also known as sequential database connections. And we'll go over that in just a moment. But first, the table lookup is pretty straightforward. Basically, you select a table in your database and you choose a key field. And what a key field is basically a column in your database with a unique identifier, such as a part number or a SKU or something of the sort, something that doesn't repeat itself. And essentially, you enter a key value, so the part number or the SKU, into that key field at the time of print. And what happens is our software will use that key value, check the key field, check that column, and go, okay, does this value exist? If it does, variable data is pulled in based upon that key value. So if I type in my part number 12345 and I have a column called part number and it finds that part number 12345, it's going to pull in all that information for that particular record as long as I've set up my label properly. So, and we will be going over that later in the demo. Now, comparatively to the sequential database connection, it's a little bit different, although it is still, a pretty solid database connection. Variable fields are essentially on the actual label are connected to database fields that are, your database connection. And at the time of print, you'll bring up the simple print screen, which I'm sure most of you have seen, where it says general form, if you have any when printed fields to fill out, and the database tab. And you're able to sequentially, starting at record one and going all the way to the end of the records, and select the one that you want. You can technically search based on certain columns if you wish, but you must always, go through, physically select the record, and then choose to print that database record at the time of print. Whereas table lookups, you can just type it in and it finds it for you, and you can just print it right off immediately. And there's no extra steps. So that's pretty much the main difference between the two. But both are very helpful in certain scenarios and situations, depending on how you want to manage your data. So now we've gone over the differences between the two, we're going to go ahead and start the training demonstration. Basically, we're going to be going an overview on database connections using some of our sample data. So this may not be exactly what you have in your environment, so bear with us, but it's just something more or less to show you how we handle database connections. So first things first is I kind of wanted to go over the differences between our the database types. So like we have the flat file, the spreadsheet, and the relational databases. And I'm going to bring this over here. And then those of you who haven't seen Notepad++, it's a pretty good tool, but this is kind of what it's helpful for. So as you can see, this is a text file. The extension type is .txt. Everything in the first row is considered a column header. And basically everything up into the comma is part of that particular column. And then, of course, there's no spaces or anything like that because as spaces mess up the formatting with these flat files. They need to be all kind of one string of information and so on and so forth. And as you can see, if we take a look at our comma separated value file, the .csv, looking at that same data, looks exactly the same. And that's pretty much the point of flat files. They're easy. They're kind of easy to create by hand, although they are tedious. but it's one of those things. Now, if we take a look at the DBF, which is considered a spreadsheet, as you can see, it does have some formatting, but all of the data is still there. And now remember, DBFs, this is going to be kind of deprecated in the near future from Microsoft. They're no longer going to be using this. So as I mentioned, if you are on this currently, I'd highly recommend moving to Excel or Access, depending on your needs. And so that is kind of like an overview of how these databases kind of look and work. And then I kind of wanted to show you what a true database program looks like in this very same format. As we can see, it's a whole bunch of gobbledygook that you would not be able to decipher whatsoever. And that is because it is a true database program. It encodes and encrypts information that you need to use the program to use because that data is formatted a specific way. And you can only access that data through the program. Whereas these particular files, you can just kind of build, send out on its way, and anyone can edit it at any time. All they have to do is open up the file. So now that we've done kind of going over that a little bit, let's go ahead and close that out. And let's take a look at the data we're going to be using today. And first thing is first, we're going to be using that database, that Microsoft Access database, one of them, of course. And that first one is our work orders database. As you can see here, we have a unique identifier. It's our work order number, although there are multiple entries. We'll be using that for something later on when we get on to the next section of our introduction, or more or less our presentation. We got a SKU, a product, and a quantity. And essentially, we are going to be looking at linking databases, daisy chaining them, so to speak, so that you can pull multiple bits of information from your different databases to achieve one common goal. And as you can see here, we have a common column called the order column. And this is what you're going to need in order to handle this sort of daisy chain process. And of course, as you can see, we have a description and an image in our database that doesn't exist in our first database. So we're going to go ahead and close those. And we are going to start off with creating the daisy chain of the databases. So first things first, let's go ahead and create those database connections. So we want to go to data source, database, created a query. Most of you have seen this window before. We're going to go to new and using the wizard. And that is going to give us this window. Now, when I was speaking about predefined file formats, these four are the ones that I mean. So if you select either one of these, they are going to automatically know, okay, I need to select this type of driver. And if it's installed, they'll grab it, connect it, good to go. These two, however, do not do that. You have to physically select it yourself or manually select it yourself. So if you don't know what provider drivers are or which one you need, it might be a little bit more difficult to create an ODBC or an OLEDB connection in this method. We will go over using the ODBC administrator for connecting to a CSV file. It's also going to go kind of touch a little bit on formatting if you guys are seeing something weird and funky in your database connection that shouldn't be happening. So we'll cover that in just a minute. So first, let's go ahead and select access because that is the type of file that we are going to connect to. And as you can see here, the name is con1, and, and we don't want that. So this is our work orders database. So I'm going to call this work orders, just to make sure that when I look at this database connection, I know exactly what file I'm connected to. I'm going to go ahead and hit next. Now we need to find that file. If there are any credentials that are necessary for the access file, you can go ahead and put them in here. So we're going to go ahead and open this up. And as you can see, this is our default folder path. And that is where all our data resides. And as you can see right here, we have our work orders ACCDB right there. And we're going to hit open and test connection. All good to go. So let's go ahead and hit finish. And we're also going to do our other database, the one we're going to be linking. So same process, new, wizard, and then we're going to be bringing over our access, and we're going to be calling this one linked database because that exactly is what it is. We are linking this database, so as our secondary. And I'm going to hit next, and we're going to go find that linked database. It's because it's a link of the description and the image. And I'm going to go ahead and test that. Still good, still good. So we're going to go ahead and hit finish. Now, as you can see, we now have our linked database as well as our work orders database. And you'll notice that they have a little icon next to them. What this means is that these are OLEDB connections, and it creates a U.UDL, which is a universal data link. We'll be going over that shortly on how to transfer these sort of database connections between workstations and so on and so forth. But if it doesn't have that, as you can see, there's quite a few of them, and these get installed and pretty much set up when you install our software into your ODBC administration. These are ODBC connections, every single one of these that does not currently have an OLEDB symbol. So if you're ever looking for some formatting tips or like, how do they connect this, you can always go into the ODBC administration and see how these are set up. And excuse me, and you'll be able to see how we kind of formatted that information and put it all together. Now, we won't be using this particular section because this is how we create a sequential database. We want to use our table lookup wizard over here. So we're going to close this, and we want to first create a key value. And that's a when printed field where we type in the information and it pulls up that record if it finds a match in our database. Now, I do want to mention that you can really use any one of these data sources to pull information from. Date might be a little bit harder depending on how you're actually doing it. By like a Julian date, that might be a little bit different. But you could pull the information, have a key value as a database data source. It could be a date. It could be the result of whatever a formula you put together. It could be whenever the counter reaches 10 or multiples of 10. I'm not sure if you'd have to probably put together a pretty good formula for that one. But there are quite a different ways to do this. But we're going to be doing it with a when printed field. So I'm just right clicking and adding, and I'm going to call this my key value because that's exactly what it is. Let's go ahead and put in some sample data here so that when we put together the table lookup, we'll be able to see some results right away. Now, first thing I like to do with anything is make sure I do not have a maximum length on my output because this can cut off some data as well as prevent you from actually searching things properly or getting things improperly brought back, I should say. So we're going to go ahead and say, okay, we have our when printed field, good to go. Now we're going to use the table lookup. So I'm doing the same thing, right clicking and going to the wizard. We want to do that for this one because it helps build the entire database all together, which is very helpful. And as you can see, it has a similar look to our sequential database setup. So we're going to go ahead and select our database. Our first one is going to be work orders. It selects the only table we have. The value, the key value is going to be, well, our key value, and the key field in our database is going to be order. Um, Now, the thing about this is that these are all the fields. These are all the columns you're pulling from. Now, ID is Microsoft Access, so unless you're using this as a key field or you're using it for something, generally don't have to enter this in. Same thing with order. Technically, the key value here is the order number, so we don't necessarily need to pull this from the actual database, but in order for the purposes of this daisy chaining demonstration, we are going to be using this as our secondary key value for that other database. So we're going to go ahead and select all four of these. And well, I'll hit next just so you can see this. Now, if you see this window, I recommend, unless it's a blank label, I don't recommend clicking any of these buttons because what will happen is it'll automatically assign whatever it is, whatever you're selecting here, to all of these values and put them on the label. So if you already have a pre-existing label, you don't want to be stacking a whole bunch of extra objects on top of it. So what I usually do here is I just hit finish. And as you can see, we have our work orders built, and let's go ahead and take a look at what it looks like. Now, here's our database. Here is the table we're pulling from. This is what we want to show, our key value and our key field. Now, these two for the entirety of this table lookup will not change. If we look at any of all these other ones, as you can see, key value, order, always the same. The setup is always going to be the same. But so let's go ahead and grab some of that information and bring it on over. So we got our product. There we go. And apparently I don't have the right number in there. So we're going to go ahead and look at that again. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9, 0. There we go. I must have fat fingered a number there. So now we got it in there. And now we look at our quantity here. We just go ahead and grab that. And looks like we get 1 for that. And then we have our SKU, which most SKUs are going to be a barcode of some kind. So let's go ahead and slap that barcode on there, make it nice and big so everyone can see it. So there we go. So we got some key fields some objects on the page that are being pulled from now a table lookup. But let's say you wanted to pull the description and the image from your order number. Easily done. So what we want to do is we want to go back to the table lookup, and we're going to go ahead and use the wizard once more. And we're going to go ahead and bring this over here so you guys can see that. Now, instead of the work orders, we're going to select our linked database. The table is called description, my key value this time, although it could be the key value or it could be something from a sequential database or any one of these data sources, as I mentioned previously. We are actually going to be pulling from this work orders order number so that basically it kind of daisy chains. Otherwise, we're just creating two table lookups with the same key value. Even though we are, it's a little bit different. So we want to go ahead and select order so that matches. We do not need the order number as we already have it here and technically the key value is. So we're going to use the description and the image. And we're just going to hit finish because we don't want to deal with anything on that other page. There we go. And as you can see, we now have the table named description along with the column that it's pulling. So if we go ahead and grab this image, slap it on there. There we go. We got our wonderful little Jeep there. That's pretty cool. And for the description one, before I slap it on the page, so I don't have to format it a whole bunch of times, and that's going to kind of take a minute. We're just going to go ahead and what I like to do is I like to create myself a fixed text field. And all I'm doing is going into the property. So I just double clicked that box. And what I'm going to be doing is going to the paragraph tab. Now, what I want to do is I want to do a word wrap, and I want to set this to 100. So we're gonna go ahead and hit OK real quick, and then I'm going to spread this out a little bit so we can kind of fill in the data a little bit and make it a little bit more legible. There we go. And now that we have this all set up, let's go ahead and change the data source. Don't want it to be fixed. We want to pull from the description table and pull the description column. So if we open this up, select that, as you can see, ta-da, nice and easy. Everything just popped right in there. It auto carriage returned because we're using the word wrap feature, and it's, it looks good. It's right where it should be. So that's essentially how you deal with daisy chaining table lookups. And of course, I'm going to open up the form here because we're going to be using this in just a few minutes, but you can kind of see how table lookups function. So as you can see, all of those part numbers that we had in the database, as you can see, we're going to go ahead and just open that up again. So you can just take a look. So we have the zeros, and then you can see the last number is the thing that changes. So if we do a test with our actual like form here and get rid of something, you see all the data goes away. Type in a 1, boop, type in a 2, type in a 3, and then type in a 4. Some of these will have Jeeps in the beginning because they are multiples, but as you'll see as we get on to the other ones, they'll have different images. So I believe it only goes up to 5 if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. But as you can see, that is how to utilize essentially table lookups in that fashion. So now that we've kind of gone over this, I do want to kind of go over admin ODBC before we hop into too much more. And then we can go over universal data links as well as excuse me, variable pick list and things like that. Actually, we probably should do the variable pick list. Seeing as how we have everything all here, that actually sounds like a better idea. Let's go ahead and do that. So now that we have all this information here, let's go ahead and get rid of it for the time being, just so we can clear off some space. And let's say the product. So that is like the name, like Jeep 4x4, things like that. Let's say we want to make this a variable pick list, and this is our new key value, and we want people to select this from a list that they can't change. And when they select it, it provides information for that particular thing. Now, I'm not going to be building the whole daisy chain table lookup. We're just going to be showing you how to create the variable pick list because it's kind of complicated, but once you learn how to do it, it's fairly straightforward stuff. So the first thing we're going to get rid of is the key value and key fields. So we want to highlight this section, go ahead and delete that row and boop, get that out of there. So all we really need is the data source, so our database, the table we're pulling from, and what we want to show. Now, before you go any further, it's important to do two things. One, make sure your output doesn't generally have a maximum limit, or find out what the character limit is and then go to that. Because otherwise it will cut off the actual results of your variable pick list. And you don't want that. So we don't want to output maximum length. Final bit, but probably the most important, is the data formatting. Now, you get this field right here called the record separator string. This is what determines the delimitation between the records. And currently it's set up as /r/n. Now, this can be confusing for some, especially if you haven't used databases or database connections in the past, like maybe more than 10 years ago, because this was an older format, still used today, very, very compatible with a lot of different things. But I want to give it something unique, something that is not going to be found in any string of data that I own, because if you choose a delimiter that is part of your data, it's going to start chopping your data in half or in weird bits, and you don't want to do that. So what I usually use is the top hat, which is sort of a little up caret, if you will, the shift 6 key. Not a lot of things use this. It's very hard to find something that does. So this is a pretty good delimiter for this particular example. And one more thing we want to do is, instead of just one relevant record, we want to see all of them. So if we hit the down button to say 0, that shows all the records. And as we can see right here, right before the end of Jeep 4x4, we have our little caret here, this little top hat that is separating all of the values of our variable pick list. So as you can see, it goes on and on and on and on, a lot of duplication things here because it's part of the database, but just wanted to show you for the purposes of doing this. So now that this is done, this is all good to go. We can go ahead and hit OK. And essentially, what we're going to be doing now is creating another when printed field. So we're going to go ahead and add. I'm going to call this one variable, if I can spell variable properly, pick list. There we go. Did I spell pick list correctly? Hey, all right. So we're not going to be entering any values of data in here. We can leave the when printed field alone unless you want to change the prompt, something like choose model of car, let's say. Let's put that in there. And as you can see, it changes in real time right there on the form. Very, very, very helpful. And then we go down here to the pick list section. But first, want to make sure our output is not hindered. And we're going to go to variable. And as you can see now, you can click in this, as you can see this box, just like the top box of our key value. But once we select force this data to come from a list, as you can see, it becomes a drop down only feature. Now, if you don't have this selected, it's a drop down and you can enter in information. So you have some leeway on how you want to manage this. But more often than not, we get people requesting, how can we stop them from touching things? Well, I just want them to select something and print it, and that's it. So this is where we have the force data to come from a list. And once we have all this set up here, we want to click the ellipsis button here, and it'll bring up our pick list variable setup. Now, this is where it kind of gets kind of confusing for most folks. Once they've done, if they know how to do the formatting, this kind of puts a wrench in things a little bit. But item separator string is the same exact thing as our record separator string. So we want to make sure these match, because if it doesn't, this variable pick list isn't going to know how to delimit the data. So we want to use our little top hat there. And now we want to select what tag identifies that item. Well, we set up our product in the work orders over here. So we're going to select product and we're going to hit OK. Now, once you hit OK, you're going to get this little, pop-up window. It looks like an error. Don't worry, everything's fine. If you hit OK, it just means that the value wasn't set. A default value wasn't set. So it chooses the first sequential one in the list, which is our Jeep 4x4. So if we hit OK and take a look at our pick list, there you go. And the way that works is, oops, not the key value. There we go. Drop that on there. We have our Jeep. And as you can see, when you're selecting from the variable pick list, it switches to the proper object or data source rather, or information. So that is that. So now that we have kind of gone over how to do table lookups with daisy chaining, and we've done variable pick lists, let's go ahead and go over the ODBC connections and setups that we're going to be using, well, in this particular example. Now, I didn't run my software as administrator to show you this. So you can access it directly from here. And just again, here, I will go again slowly. Sorry, I do forget that I know where everything is, and some people may not know that, so I apologize. So we're gonna go to Tools and Administrator ODBC. You can also get to OLEDB if you're looking to find out, what databases I've created, the information in here. We'll be going over this in a little bit once we talk about UDLs, or the Universal Data Links. So let's go ahead and take a look at our ODBC setup right here. Now, the reason why I didn't run this as administrator, the CodeSoft program, is for this reason, to show you this. If you hit system DSN, you're going to get this error because you're not running the program as administrator. This program does not have administrative rights to add anything to the ODBC data source. So thankfully, what I can do is I can just cancel out of this, and I'm going to launch it directly from my start menu by typing in ODBC and then running that bad boy as administrator, and ta-da, there we go, we're on the same page. Now, if we look at system DSN here, we can see that all of our pre-existing database connections that were created when we installed our software are here, and these are the provider drivers. This is what I was talking about earlier. This is the extension that this driver is formatted for. So if you don't know your drivers and extensions, like I said, ODBC is going to give you a hard time. So as we can see here, we have our test database. Let's say we want to recreate this for whatever reason. We're going to go ahead and remove this, and then we are going to recreate it. So let's go ahead and do that. So we're going to go ahead and add real quick, and it's going to bring that window over here. And here is a list of all of our provider drivers. Again, as you can see, it's got the extension types for what they touch and what, basically the name of the driver. So what I want to do is I want to look for CSV because we are going to be connecting to a CSV file. And there it is right there, our Microsoft text driver. It handles text and CSV files. So we're going to go ahead and say finish, and that's going to bring up another window that allows us to create the database connection. So I'm going to call this test database. If I could spell database correctly. There we go, and still didn't spell it right. All right, nope, I think I messed up. It's been one of those days. I think I'm gonna take a nap after this, people, because yeah, that is not how you spell. Okay, so test database. There we go. We got our name in there. You could put a description if you want. It's not necessary. But one thing you definitely want to do is change that current directory because it's looking at it in the Windows System 32 directory. And if you have your databases there, I would recommend moving them because that is not where you want them. So we're going to go ahead and select the directory now where our database is located. Generally, I recommend it being the same directory as your default folder path under Tools and Configuration in CodeSoft. So we're going to go ahead and do that. Go to the C drive, go down to Users, go to Public, go to Documents, TEKLYNX, CodeSoft, Data. And as you can see right there, there's all of our sample text files along with our work orders, text, and CSV file. So now that we've selected the actual folder, we're good to go. We can hit OK, and basically we are done. Now, there is one thing I wanted to kind of show you about this, and that is it doesn't happen for everyone. It's not going to happen here when I show you because I have the proper driver, but if you don't, you may see something different. Now, one thing we want to do is select our data source. So we go down here, test database. As you can see, it is now already available. And our tables are essentially all of the things that we can connect to. Those would be considered the tables. So let's go ahead and look at our work orders. So as you can see here, I have the right driver, so it formats it into a CSV format, and it knows exactly how to define my data, which is that schema we were talking about, the file formatting for those particular columns. Now, if you don't see any tables or you don't see any fields, then what you want to do is you want to make sure you define that information. So let's go ahead and open up our ODBC administration once again. I'm going to have to do it for my computer, as I mentioned before. So we're going to go ahead and do that. Now let's go ahead and select our database that we want to configure, and we select configure. It brings us back to this very same window we have here. And essentially what we want to do is we want to click on options. Now currently, if this is set to the default, it's all. It's more or less a comma or a period of some kind. But if this isn't correct, what we want to do is we want to define the format. And that brings us to this window. And essentially what we want to do is we are looking at the different types of database connections we have here, but for the particular one we're looking for in general is our work orders CSV. As you can see here, the format's already selected to be CSV delimited. If it's not, that's why you may not see those fields. And you could even guess that information, and as you can see, it's going to say, okay, I see at least 5 columns, but I don't know what they are. They seem to be integer types. So what you can do is, select the column header, guess again. And as you can see, it knows exactly what the names of those column headers are. You may also encounter this too if you have a database in one of these formats and you don't have a column header designated as the top of your data. It may just be pulling in the first record as the column header. So you definitely want to make sure you're not doing that. So essentially, this is how you format your data. Um, if you're looking for any more help on that, I mean, obviously we can suggest some ways to go about it, or what you might need in order to help with that connection. Again, must reiterate, we don't manage the data or the database. We just help you guys get it connected inside of our software. So now that we've gotten that taken care of, let's go ahead and take a look at universal data links, our .udls. And those are going to be located basically in our tools, configuration, default folders. As you can see right down here, we have provided you with the OLEDB connections called .udls, universal data links. So we're just going to copy that and we're going to pop it into our file explorer and we're going to search it. And as you can see, we have a pre-existing one as well as the two that we just created. And the way that universal data links work is that, well, let's see here, go to data and we'll go back a little bit here. Let's go to our query section. Okay. So the way that this works is that when you create a database connection, an OLEDB connection rather, as you can notice, they have a little icon. These are not ODBC connections. Basically, all this is basically a path, a directory saying, hey, this is where I'm located. So if we open this up, we can see that it is basically just a roadmap. What provider driver are you using? We're using the ACE 12.0 driver. That's the one we're using to connect to this particular file type. Okay, where's it located? Well, it's located in our default folder path, and it gives us the absolute path, so it gives us the whole thing, along with the file name and extension. And okay, so does this require credentials? No, it doesn't. So that's pretty much what all of that means right there. Now, this whole thing right here kind of works in tandem with our queries, but queries are only saved in sequential database connections, but it still works with OLEDB. Like if we were to create the grid field one, as you can see here, I have the grid field CSQ. And what this does is when you open up the software or you want to rebuild the database connection, you essentially click on the query, you can run it, and what the query does is it goes, okay, it's the structure. I know what the structure is. We're selecting this database, we're selecting this table. These are going to be the result fields that we want to show. How do we get to that? And then it references the .udl. And the UDL tells it, oh, you got that? Okay, cool. Well, you can use this driver. Go find the file in this spot and you're good. You don't need to put any additional information in. And then these two kind of work in tandem to get that database up and running again. So if you're looking to transfer from workstation A to workstation B or multiple workstations, generally all you have to do is go to the default folder path of wherever our software is looking for it. And as you can see here, if this were me doing this, I would take this link or this directory, copy it, and go, okay, on every other workstation I want to bring these UDLs to, I need to find this exact same folder or directory and copy and paste all of this information into that folder. And then what we're going to be doing is doing the same thing with the queries on the other workstations, grabbing all this information and bringing it over to the other workstation. And as long as you have that and all of your databases are in a centralized location, like they're not moved at all, you should be able to connect to it almost instantaneously. Sometimes there are mishaps though. You might need to install a provider driver. We most often see that with the ACE 12.0 driver. So if you have any questions, feel free to give us a buzz. We'll be more than happy to help you on that one. So essentially, that pretty much kind of covers the database creations and connections topical webinar. But we want to kind of touch on a few more things, and of course, we still have the Q&A section. So we do hope you found this demonstration helpful. But kind of as a recap of what we've gone over so far, just so that we know, kind of a wrap up more or less, as that's why we call it the wrap up. So as you can see, database connections are a must-have for modern digital labeling environments. Now, that's not saying, mom and pop shops, or if, you have one guy or girl that's just sitting there in production all day and printing off maybe 10 labels a day, and you have maybe 3 labels. You're right, absolutely right. Maybe databases aren't for you. But if you have multiple products and you are, able to have multiple different facets, and you're like, okay, we got to do this and then this and then this, and you're changing things very frequently, especially when it comes to the data, but the template remains the same. That's almost a must-have. It makes it so much easier to access information and print it on out. So it's a must-have, not really a nice-to-have. Although it can be viewed as that for some businesses, depending on the complexity of your labels. Secondly, we've gone over creating table lookups and database connections, and we know that it's easy in any of our label design software. And of course, naturally, if you're having any issues getting those database connections set up, we are here to help. So feel free to give us a call. We'll help you as best we can in the capacity of whatever the context of the issue is. But again, remember, we do not manage data and we do not manage databases. And let's see here. The final note we have going on here is basically if you're looking for more out of your database functionality, that is where we have our enterprise solutions. We have our Sentinel product, which is great for automating label printing, and it's great for business system integration. So if you have a front end ERP that you guys have already paid a bunch of money for, and you just want to send a file from your ERP, have it parsed, processed, and print out a label, or several hundred or 1,000, then Sentinel might be for you. It helps automate that printing process, and you can define how it breaks down the information in the file that you're sending it. And of course, we're here to help you set that up. For those who are looking for a little bit more complex diversity in their labeling environment, like they want to have label traceability and label security, like an approval process, just so not any Joe Schmo is creating a label and printing off 1,000 labels, and then well, great, they just wasted $1,000 worth of stock because now we can't use those labels because they haven't been approved, and we're in a federally regulated environment. So this is mostly seen. I wouldn't say mostly seen, but I would say it's quite a few. Is very helpful for produce or FDA regulated environments. Great for that, or anything scientific where you have to keep track of the iterations of your labels, and you want to make sure not every label is just ready to go right out the gate. You want to make sure someone checks off and signs off on that, going thumbs up, that's good to go. Make sure that gets into production. And if you want something even larger than that, we have our TEKLYNX Central product, which kind of encompasses all three of these products together, which is basically great for global supply chain labeling, where you want to have no localized installs on all your workstations, because that just takes time and effort and money to pay the IT people to do that. But you can access your entire labeling environment from a web interface. And of course, it utilizes Label Archive to keep traceability and security on your labels. And of course, Sentinel is what automates all of the printing process, and naturally, CodeSoft, it will use that printing engine to kind of drive this whole thing. Now, I did want to mention for our SQL and Oracle users, I know this was sort of on the basic realm and we didn't really touch on any of those database connectivities, but if you're using basically those particular types of databases, that's generally the people that are using our larger software, Sentinel, Label Archive, and Central, or vice versa, because once you get into that realm, you kind of need that heavy hitter database in order to handle all the information you're dealing with. But I did want to mention that all of the principles that we've covered here today are still duplicated, are able to be duplicated with your SQL and Oracle databases. You can still manipulate the data just the same once it's inside the software. So we do hope, like I said, that you have found everything interesting. There is going to be a webinar. I mean, not a webinar, a survey after this. It's not obligatory, but we can't get better at our jobs if you don't let us know how we did. So if you found something that was helpful, let us know. If you think it wasn't helpful, let us know. If you think I talked too much, that's quite all right. I already know that, but let us know anyway. And of course, if you have any questions, there are several ways to contact us. So now I'm going to be opening up to the Q&A section. So we're going to go ahead and basically just kind of kick off our Q&A. So if you have any questions, it's all anonymous. Don't feel bad. Go ahead and shoot us some information, and I will be happy to answer it. We got about, let's see, what time is it? Here we got right on time roughly. So we got about like 10 minutes, 10, 15 minutes. And of course, if we need to extend it longer for additional questions, we certainly will. So it looks like most of these have been already handled by our awesome moderator, Tony, but looks like we do have a question here that was not answered yet. So let's see here. The question is, how do you fix OLEDB database connections not visible on different workstations? Now, I presume you mean that you have built it on one workstation and you basically have the label on another workstation. You're all grabbing everything from a centralized location, I imagine. I'm just presuming here. And when you go to open up that label, it says that there was a DSN table error. It couldn't find that database. And that's exactly essentially what we were talking about regarding the information, regarding the setup of centralizing your actual database. So if you have individual local copies, and let's say my database is located in my own user public, like my profile, its documents page or whatever like that. If I go over to workstation B, if I don't have my profile on there and they're not logging in as me, they're not going to see that directory. So you want to make sure you're using universal directories like that. And that's why we use our public documents sort of directory path, because that's installed on every single Windows everywhere. So if you have it in there and it's in a centralized location, everyone should be able to find it. So I do hope that has answered your question. And if not, of course, we can always clarify on that. The next question here, is there any way to take the quantity to print from a database as well? Absolutely. We have something in our software called control variables, and I'm just going to bring this down here for a bit just so you guys can kind of see what I'm talking about here. So if we go to the formula section and we go to add here, and we go all the way to the bottom and we got our data sources, it's going to have everything that's in this list over here, but you'll also end up seeing these things with little at symbols. These are what is known as control variables. These override whatever function that they're meant to override in the software as well as the label. And the one you're looking for, depending on how you want to use it, it could be at label CBY for label copy, and it does give a little description, as you can see here. But the one that I would recommend is the at serial quantity, at serial QTY. Determines the numbers of labels printed. So if you were to put a value into this, like such as a database data source or a win printed field or something like that, when you went to the print screen, that's going to be the value that's in that general tab under numbers of labels to be printed. So I hope that answers that question. So you can certainly do that in our software. Let me see here. I'm just go ahead and put that back up there just so you can have our contact information, and we'll go back if we need to again. Let's see here. What are the pros of having a daisy chain database? Well, okay, so the pros are is that you get to have multiple databases that have a commonality between them. So as I mentioned with our example, we have a part number that exists in both databases, but one is for descriptions and images, and the other one is for SKUs and product names. So it allows you to keep your databases separate, and then in certain instances when it requires both, it allows you to use both without combining the two in a view or creating an entirely new database. So it kind of saves you a little bit of time and effort in being able to access that data from multiple different points of connectivity. So I hope that answers your question. And if not, of course, you can always compound on that. So that seems to be the three that haven't been answered quite yet that I did just answer. So if there are any other questions, please do ask them. Now is the time. Of course, granted, it's not like that's it, we cut off. Because I mean, if once the webinar is over and you got a question, feel free to give us a call. We'll be happy to answer it then too. All right, we'll give it a few more moments here. Oh, here we go. Okay, so if we, most welcome. So if we have different labels, we need to map different files to different labels. Well, essentially, yes. Whenever you create a new label, it is going to not have a database connection connected to it. But what you can do is once you've set them up on one workstation, you can bring the queries and the .udls, those universal data links, over to that new workstation. And it should automatically open when you open up the label. If it doesn't, and you're creating a brand new label, it's not an existing one, but you still want to connect to that particular database, what you can do is open up the new label and go to here. You know what? We will just do that. So let's say I wanted to connect this to my work orders as a database, not as one of these table lookups here. So let's actually just go ahead and get rid of all that. And actually, we gotta get rid of the variable pick list first. There we go. Whoops, get rid of that. Oh, can't use that because that is being used. There we go. Come on. There we go. All right, so let's say we don't have anything, right? And we just want to connect to a database. So essentially what you would do is you go to data source, database, and run query. Now I'm going to use our work order, or I know we don't have work orders. I'm going to use our grid field one, the one we talked about earlier. So I'm just going to go ahead and select that and hit open, and it's going to run a query. And as you can see, it's connected sequentially me to that new database. Now, if you want to do it as a table lookup, on the other hand, unfortunately, you are going to have to kind of build that. If it exists in a previous label and you notice that the table lookup is broken, essentially all you'd have to do then is go into the table lookup and select this. So like everything else will be blank, but as soon as you select the work orders, it remembers the configuration and everything else should be built back in. So hopefully that answers your question as to how to connect to databases on other workstations that don't have them yet. So so yeah. All right, so there's that one. Okay, so we have another question. What if you have a project where the client needs two labels, like a front and back, using the same data in each? How would you do that? Oh, okay. Sorry. It looks like that one was just answered. But yeah, no, it definitely would use our layers feature. So you go to a view and select layers. And as you can see over here, we can see the front side, the back side, and of course, there's also a pre-label and a post-label you could put together with it. So that is kind of one of those features that we do have in there. Just taking a look here to see if we have any other questions. Okay, all right. So it looks like we did have a question here that we feel might be beneficial to everyone. So we are going to talk about it. So here we go. Is there an option to keep querying the database when a new record is inserted and then printed with the label with the information? Currently, that is not available with our label design applications. If you're looking for this functionality, however, we do have it available in our enterprise automation product, Sentinel, one of our enterprise solutions, as we talked about earlier. And if you, of course, if you are interested, we can always have someone of our enterprise team follow up with you, kind of go over the details of the of what's going on. And if you're interested, get you guys like a demo so you guys can validate it in your environments. And then, of course, naturally, if it's something that you want to go forward with, we'll certainly, give you a quote and we can go from there. So I do believe that might be everything. There we go. Oh, okay. Yes. So I'm up and yeah, the moderator is on point today, so we already got those questions answered. Um, yeah. So I mean, if there are any other questions, keep them coming. We do have a couple more minutes for some Q&A, and then we'll wrap this up. And then again, please remember, if you can, do feel free to fill out the survey. As I mentioned, we can get better if we don't know, if we're doing well or if we're doing poorly. And of course, naturally, we always ask, hey, well, what topics would you like to learn about? Because the more people that talk about it, well, we may have a topical webinar for it shortly. I mean, you never know. And so far, I'm not really seeing any new questions, but I'll give it a couple more minutes just in case someone's typing one out and they're giving it some good thought. So we'll just hang on for just a moment here, and then we'll get to any questions that may pop up. Okay. All right. Well, looks like we don't have anything yet. So I do believe that is pretty much going to conclude the webinar. Looks like everyone's. Yes. Okay. So is the webinar going to be available after? Yes. We will be sending out a recording of this particular webinar tomorrow via email to all of our users that attended. And again, we do appreciate you attending and taking the time out of your day. We hope you found this helpful. So again, have a great day. Thank you again for joining us. Again, my name is Nicholas Arbor. And if you guys have any questions or concerns, or if you're just looking to find out some information about the labeling world as it is and our software, feel free to give us a call. I'm going to put that information up on the screen one more time. And there we go. And yeah, if we're going to leave it up there for about 2 more minutes so people can grab that information, and then the webinar will close. So if that is everything, let's go ahead and kind of mute myself, and I'll let you guys do your thing. I will keep an eye out for any additional questions, although I don't see any more showing up. But thank you very much, and have a great day.